Good morning and welcome to the Corporate and Administrative Services Committee meeting of the Sunshine Coast Regional District. It is Thursday, April 28th, and I'd like to acknowledge that we are within the territory of the Seychelles and Squamish Nations. First, before we, do we adopt or put a vice chair in before we actually adopt the agenda, or does that come after we adopt the agenda? Yeah, all right. We're going to appoint Director Leonard Lee as Vice Chair. I'd like a motion for that, please. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. So we have an agenda in front of us. Are there any additions or deletions to the agenda? Seeing none, I'd look for a motion to adopt as presented. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. And I'd look for a motion to receive all the delegation materials and the reports. Moved. Seconded. All in favor? Thank you. All right, first up is a delegation. We have Corey Vanderhorst with MNP, and is Christy with you as well? Yes, Christy. Yes, Christy's here as well. Christy Robotham, and they are our auditors. So, Corey, over to you.
Thank you, Manager. Sorry, apologize. I'm getting some bad.
Your audio is not good, Corey. Thank you.
Yeah. Let me try something.
We can hear you now.
Better? Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. I think you have to be a little bit louder.
Okay, I've lost audio for you now. Apologies. Can you hear me now? Okay.
Now we can't hear you again.
Apologies. Now my microphone appears to be back on. Is this good?
Your mic's back up. It seems to be cutting in and out a little bit, but let's try it.
I am going to turn my video off. Apologies for the technical difficulties. This is similar to what I had yesterday. Okay, I'm going to stop my video. Share my screen again. Okay, hopefully that's working better. I can see you on my second monitor, so if for some reason I start cutting out again, please wave at me and I will pause. Thank you for having me here again this morning to present to you. Switching gears into the regional district presentation. Apologies, I was remiss in the first presentation to thank staff for their work on the financial statements at the hospital district and also at the regional district. Big thank you to Tina, Brad, and Alex as the main people that we worked with, but we do talk to many people throughout the regional district. So I know you've got about 100 pages of material in your package there. I'll take you through about the first 10 and go through my presentation for the regional district's 2021 financial statements, and then I would be happy to answer questions at the end. So moving right along then, I'll start by looking at some financial statement highlights from 2021, talk a little bit about the audit process, and then just confirm our independence at the end. So looking at your financial statements, which I think start somewhere around page 32 or 33 in the package, a really high level summary of the regional district's finances at the end of 2021. You have cash and investments of just over $56 million on hand. If we add in some receivables and other financial assets, it's a $67.9 million of financial assets. Your regional district debt is $10.4 million. You can see it's being paid down on schedule from the 12.5 in 2020. When we add in accounts payable, wages payable, other liabilities, your total liabilities at the end of 2021 were $38.5 almost the same amount as the prior year. If we subtract the total liabilities from your financial assets, we get what we call the net financial asset position of $29.5 million. The tangible capital assets being managed by the regional district, infrastructure, buildings, equipment, water, sewer, although not roads, is $135.2 million. Very consistent with the prior year. So not a lot of change in that net book value of physical assets. And the accumulated surplus, which I will get into in a future slide, is at $167.5 million. The income statement or statement of operations for 2021, total revenues for the year of $53.8 million, an increase from the prior year's 49, but you can see, and almost at budget of 54.1. Again, as in any other regional district and community we work with, grants tends to be one that causes variation from budget, whether grants come through in the financial plan and some of the projects, but very close to budget on the revenue side. On the expense side, $44.9 million of expenses for 2021, up from the prior year's 40.8, but under budget, where 50.7 was in the budget. On an accounting basis, you have an annual surplus of $8.9 million, very consistent with the prior year's 8.3. I kept saying accounting surplus there, and there's lots of adjustments and things that go through. When you are looking at your budget, you are thinking more in this context of the cash flows and the actual cash moving in and out of the main bank accounts at the regional district. So the statement of cash flows in the financial statements shows cash inflows from operations of the regional district of $17.1 million, capital spending of $5.8 million, 2.4 moved into investments to earn a better rate of return, and then financing. So net of any new debt, financing was repaid by $1 million. So there's a net cash inflow in the main bank accounts of $7.8 million, fairly consistent with the 7.1 in the prior year. I did promise I would get into what's in accumulated surplus. So you can see this big number of $167 million. The largest part of that is what we call the invested in non-financial assets. So that is the tangible capital assets minus the debt associated with it, as a net value of $127 million. So that is not cash in your bank accounts. That is things you can touch and things that are providing services for your residents. There's $38 million set aside in reserves for future projects. Capital fund has another $5.4 million. This current fund of a deficit of $3.8 million. And there's a small amount of this MFA debt reserve cash that you will receive scheduled out when the debt is retired. So this sits with MFA and you get it back when you finish the debt payments. Switching gears then into the audit and the audit results, happy to be providing a clean audit opinion or an audit opinion without modification. We are satisfied that the financial statements for the regional district are prepared accurately in all material respects. We're ready to sign the report. I've got all my last bits of documentation and audit steps done. The last thing would be the board approval here this morning. A reminder when we're doing our audit, or a refresher on audits, as exciting as that sounds, when we're doing our audit, we look at the controls in place at the regional district, look at the risk management that's happening on a day-to-day basis, the controls that are ensuring that you are getting accurate reporting in the financial statements. We sample transactions throughout the year to form our audit opinion. We don't look at every transaction. That's just not economically feasible. And again, a thank you to Tina and Brad on the regional district side and all staff for helping us with the audit this year. A transition to a new auditor always has some challenges, and they were very helpful in the process. I want to thank them very much. And the final slide I have here before I pause for questions is just a confirmation that MMP is independent of the regional district. We didn't do any other work, any other projects that would impair our ability to give you an independent audit opinion. and that covers from January 1st, 2021, the start of the fiscal period, to today's date, April 28th. Thank you very much. I will stop the sharing, and I would be happy to answer any questions. If there are specific questions that get into operational issues, I will defer to staff for an answer on those ones. Thank you.
Thank you. Directors, any questions? Director McMahon.
I have several questions, but they also relate to the next report that's coming as Annex B. So are we going to do questions now and then, or do them all at once, or how should we handle this?
How would you like us to handle that?
I'm happy to answer anything covered in those first 100 pages there of the financial statements, the audit findings report, the management letter. That anything is fair game at this point, Director McMahon.
Go ahead.
Okay, I'll tackle one. Financial plan amendments. There was a mention that we've had a lot of financial plan amendments, which is not altogether surprising given the uncertainties of the time. And then elsewhere in the audit report, it mentions global uncertainty and supply chain issues. So this sounds to me like we're going to be doing more financial plan amendments. Do you have any, could you expand on this topic a little?
Thank you, Director. It's a great point that with supply chain challenges, the ability for your staff to get projects done is challenged. Our comment on the financial plan amendments is I believe there are multiple throughout the year, and we kind of have an overarching comment there to review the process going involved with an eye to two things. One is efficiency of the staff being able to get projects done, and the other one is risk management, and knowing that taxpayer dollars are not being wasted, that there's accountability there, but also that there's a fine balance for the regional district to be able to get projects completed. There will be supply chain delays. We know that's going to happen in the foreseeable future, depending on whether it's a construction project or other significant one. Cost escalation is also thing that we're dealing with in lots of aspects of our lives, and the regional district will be exposed to that just like any other organization. So it's finding the balance between flexibility for staff to do their job to get the projects completed, and for the board to provide that oversight and accountability and control. So that's sort of where what's driving the comment. And to staff, if Tina has any comments there, I would welcome comments.
Ms. Perot.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And so this is one of the items that was identified last month at the CAS budget debrief for 2022, was to develop a financial planning policy. And so that's scheduled to come forward either at May or June CAS for the board's consideration. And part of that is to identify what qualifies for a financial plan amendment. So last year I think after over the last 2 years, we've had quite an accumulation of financial plan amendments. And some of our discussion with the auditors was trying to get a gauge and even doing a survey of my own CFO counterparts. And it seems as though we're unusually high. And so we wanted to identify or do an analysis of what was the symptom of that. And I think some of that is deferral of projects. We have a considerable amount, or I think quite an unusual amount of projects on the docket. So we have lots of carry forwards. And so the time delay of that, combined with the pandemic and the supply chain issues and even what's happening going forward. So we want to understand what that is. The other part is that in our financial statements, we report on the financial plan as it was approved. So there is somewhat of a transparency and accountability that I think was identified with Corey, was that when we report to the public on this particular information. Our financial statements don't reflect the changes. So if it is quite material, there isn't really that continuity. And so the public aren't aware of those types of things unless they're that snapshot or they're keeping track of the literal breadcrumbs of all the financial plan amendments that we've done. So that's why we've also instilled where we actually amend our financial plan bylaw twice a year, which I think is also quite a bit. So I think that we just have to be mindful of this and to make sure that really there is a strong business case for those types of things, and maybe look as far as trying to mitigate these financial plan amendments, such as how projects are scopes, putting appropriate contingencies into budgets, and really doing a fulsome business case when budget proposals are put forward. So I think it's just a culmination, and we're going to bring some of those for consideration for the board, but we are happy to see it in the management letter, just because we feel it's an important thing for the public and the board to understand.
Follow-up?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask the auditors if regional districts are more prone to financial plan amendments because of our very inflexible, siloed method of budgeting.
Thank you, Director. It's a good question. You definitely have a challenge with the difference between a municipality and the regional district, and not having the flexibility to move money between electoral areas or other reserves and things. So yes, it's more challenging for sure. Do I see more financial plan amendments and adjustments in regional districts? Not necessarily. I think further to the Director of Finance comments, it's striking a balance between the operational policies, purchasing policies, and the financial plan in the context of the regional district, and the extra layer of segregation that has to happen with those funds, right? You're not going to be able to transfer from area B to area C. That's their money. So it definitely is an added challenge, but I don't necessarily see more financial plan amendments in regional districts than in cities or towns.
Thank you. Director Hiltz?
Thanks, Chair. I just have to say I love audit season. Just to let you know, it's one of the highlights, because for me it is this independent review to help me and my constituents understand the regional district. So thanks for being here. So my first question is on the materiality, and kind of two pieces. In the last meeting, you said a nice succinct phrase that it went something like, we test every transaction over the materiality and we sample underneath the materiality. So I guess in that question is, what constitutes a transaction? And when, and somehow there's a restating would need to be done. So a little bit of detail about that phrase, testing every transaction over and sampling under, and then the materiality for the regional district. Last year we had two materialities, one for infrastructure and one for other things, and this year we have one. So sorting some of those pieces out for me. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Director. Yeah, good questions. And I didn't hit on the materiality there. For some reason it was missing in the slides. So we did use $2 million for the regional district. So getting into some of the materiality number, so we calculate that as a percentage of your revenues for the year as an indicator of activity. That's how we get to the $2 million. We did use one number. You're correct. We have a different approach than the prior auditor. We only use the $2 million. Now, when we're doing our testing, we actually use a number that we call performance materiality. So we scope that down to 75%. So $1.5 million, and then we use that to drive our testing. So any individual transaction, so an invoice or anything going through the general ledger that's recorded by your finance staff that is larger than $1.5 million, we're looking at the invoice, or we're looking at the source of it. Now, at that level, the only thing that we're really seeing is some of the requisition coming through and large capital, right? That is a big number. So then what we do is underneath that, in each of the various lines, cash, accounts receivable, accounts payable, we use that number to drive the amount of tests that we do. And we also combine that with a risk assessment of where we think there are risks of misstatement in the financials or inherently riskier accounts. So for us, for regional districts, and this is not just your regional district, but all regional districts in general that we work with, we tend to poke around more at revenue, at the ability for revenues to be in the wrong year. Specifically, we're looking at government grants, federal or provincial grants. Has the money been spent? If it's unspent, should it be sitting in deferred revenue? We also look at the significant estimates at a tighter look on those. So landfill liability is a big one where we, even though we've got that $1.5 million materiality number, we're providing much more scrutiny there because it is a significant estimate. So that gets a little bit away fully from the materiality concept, but hopefully that gives you a bit of an idea of what does that mean with that number of $2 million and what sort of areas are we actually poking into.
And under what conditions would restatement intersect with the materiality of the restatement of the financial statement?
Yeah, at that $2 million number, you would have to have an error, $1 over $2 million. I could not give you a clean audit opinion. So when we're looking at our work, an individual transaction that's over $2 million, I would request the Director of Finance to make the adjustment and fix the financial statements. And then we also would accumulate any issues that we found throughout the audit process. And if they accumulated to over that $2 million number, I would also require something to be adjusted. So there's an important to note, and I'm on page 17 of your packages. We did not have any significant differences to bring to the board's attention this year. And when I say significant, I mean anything over $200,000. So I use 10% of materiality for that number. So as we went through the process with Tina and Brad, nothing came to our attention where we requested adjustments that were over $200,000.
I'm going to go Ms. Perot because she turned her camera or her thing on.
Yeah, so I just wanted to comment. Yep, my camera's on. So I just wanted to also comment, so that's just what Corey concluded with, which is sometimes on occasion, if we feel that it helps to provide the reader with some transparency and it's below the materiality, we may choose to amend the financial statements. In the case of when we're doing updates to tangible capital assets or such, we have chosen to amend the financial statements below the materiality. So it really is a choice and a discussion with the auditors. But again, for them, there's a difference between you shall or must and if you choose.
That's right. Good point, Tina. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I'm up here next. I want to turn to page 31. This is part of the audit management letter. And in the audit management letter, it talks about prior year auditor observations. So these are the notes that were in last year's management letter and are being addressed here. The one I'd like to look at is prior year auditor observation number 1. And I'm going to look to Corey and to our staff to see how is this being addressed, or are there other things that we need to keep our eye on here to ensure that this gets addressed in this year?
Thank you, and I can give a brief comment and then turn it back to Tina. So our follow-up on this item was primarily interview-driven, I would call it, and discussions with staff of where is the progress on an HR policy and some of the things that were mentioned by the prior year auditor. So our understanding is it is still in process. I know there's a comment there about the draft benefit policy in progress and is on staff's desk with a priority. So that's our observations and our discussions back. I would, if Tina has anything to add.
GM or Senior Manager Parker, that's how it is. I'd look at your titles there. Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we certainly are aware of this. It has been an outstanding item. I think my comment back would be, we recognize this affects maybe 1% of our staff. Over the past couple of years, we have had to focus our attention on fitness for duty policy, code of conduct, sick leave during COVID, respectful workplace, vaccination, criminal record check, working remotely, the exempt bylaw, and also when we were nearing completion at the end of last year, we introduced a whole new stream of benefits that are provisions to our volunteer firefighters, which had never been included before. So it is prompted capacity issues, but we do have a consistent application of our approach, and as soon as we can get the amended revisions done, it will be in place. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to do a follow-up. So perhaps halfway through the year, we could get an update. I think our goal would be that this would come back next year and say complete.
Yes, in fact, we actually anticipated having it done next week, but it's probably going to be delayed again for about 2 more weeks. So I anticipate by the end of May. Thank you.
Thank you. Director McMahon.
Yeah, this may seem like a silly question, but I'm wondering why we are concerned about our HR benefits policy. Like, what is the potential financial impact of not having it updated?
Who would like to speak to that one? Well, sure, I can speak to it, and perhaps Tina can add some comments there. The issues that have come up have to do with complex situations involving staff absences related to illness or injury, either on the job and off the job. And it gets very complicated when you start off with a WorkSafe claim that then turns into a personal disability claim and can sometimes revert back and forth. Mental health claims are also challenging, and the continuation of salary while claims are being adjudicated is the area of focus that can sometimes take far longer than is usually anticipated. So it's the provision of salary while staff's claims are being adjudicated that is the main focus of the update. Thank you.
And Ms. Pro, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, just to say that part of the identification is really from an internal control perspective. And so when there's authority to expend funds, but there's no policy procedure delegation to accompany it, that's why if it's not in policy or bylaw, then there's no real substantiation of validating any issuance of payment. So that was what part of the identification of some of the HR policies, where there's issuance of payment and there's no accompanying validation as to the reason why you're doing that. So from an internal control perspective, that's why you'd want to strengthen those policies.
Thank you. Good question. I learned some stuff there. Director Hiltz.
I'm going to pick up on this one again. So the first thing is which policy, as it says policy and policies, and who it affects, I guess, and is this a board policy or is this an operational policy? What are we actually talking about? It says since 2008, and to follow up, I think it was 2017 was the first time this was raised, because I guess it's 10 years after the policy was adopted. So who's affected by this, and is it one or more, and does the board see this policy? Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. It is a staff policy. It's not a board policy, so it'd be approved by the CAO when it is updated and revised. It is the benefit administration policy, but there are other policies that we know, for example, the exempt bylaw, which is under revision. There's an associated salary administration policy. So we have to get the bylaw aligned with the direction that we're looking to bring it, and the bylaw, of course, will be in front of the board. Thank you.
So this would be my interpretation of all the stuff you said. It's that if somebody comes and does their regular job and gets their regular salary, we have no issues. It's when circumstances happen, either they get injured, they're sick, they're whatever, we need policy in place to guide staff so that there's consistency across what gets paid and everybody knows what that is. And it actually gets reflected in the financial statements then. Am I kind of on the mark?
Yes, I would agree with that. And it's so that it's not subject to any interpretation. It's clear.
Thank you. Directors, any other questions? Director Hills.
Thanks. Where was I? My notes say page 29 and 30, the three-way match. I'm looking at what is a three-way match and why would we need a three-way match? And I'm just wondering how it all kind of rolls into like inventory control. That's my notes. I'll have to get to the page myself.
Ms. Pro.
Yes, thank you. I can start, and if our manager of financial operations too wants to jump in or query on this particular matter. So when we designed our financial system that went live in 2017, we had a vision as to how purchase orders and approval of transactions would flow. As we've evolved through the system, we have multiple types of transactions. So we have multi-year contracts, we have transactional inventory-related items, we have things that are service-based contracts, and we have just, very like sundry-related items. So we do have some purchasing policies and procedures that guide us, but our financial system is built that is a one-size-fits-all. And so in practice, that's not really practical. For instance, you might have a landscaping contract that is multi-year, and our ability to do drawdowns to that amongst multiple functions is quite difficult. And so our ability to 100% of the time to say that this invoice matches the purchase order and it just flow through our system and goes through the approval is not consistent. And so we have to do an evaluation and redesign of the system as far as the different types of transactions. So it's going to require a reconfiguration of the system, and we may choose that in some instances we don't strive for that three-way match because from a risk perspective it may or may not make sense from a business perspective. And of course we'll work with our auditors to ensure that. But I think in the testing, and this is coming back to some of your, do you test below the materiality? This is where I think one of the benefits of some of the type of testing that was done is that they got into, these transactional based items to ensure the internal controls were there. And so staff were aware of this, and we have been struggling because it is sort of an operational bugaboo for our various staff. And so, yeah, it's going to take a significant amount of effort to make this modification, as well as, training staff, et cetera. So from an inventory management perspective, there's not so much of an impact to it. It wasn't identified through our inventory counts this year that there was a significant change to that. They're the ones that I think are more on top of this, but from an inventory management perspective, we have lots of areas that aren't actually doing inventory management, such as our recreation facilities. So that is on both purchasing and in finances and multiple work plans. It's just our ability and capacity to get to that.
So a follow-up is the Unit 4 ERP doesn't necessarily jive with the regional district model. It's not a perfect match, I guess, in some ways.
It's not the system's fault, it's how the system was configured. And we configured it that all transactions would be the same, but not all transactions are the same type. So like I said, we have multi-year contracts, we have service-based contracts, we have drawdown contracts, and it's not a fine science. So we have to attune it to be able to react to those different transactions in a different manner.
And if I could jump in there, Tina, I agree with your comment. It's not necessarily the Unit 4 ERP, it's the processes that are happening there. In our experience, the three-way match, purchase order, invoice, receiving, some communities don't do three-way match. Some communities rely less and less on the purchase order system and it comes down to that invoice approval and receiving as the, so, you know, I mean, two-way match, for lack of a better word, is that they are adjusting their controls and their policies and procedures. And every organization is different size and has different risks to manage. So there's no right or wrong answer, as long as you are controlling your risks, you know, of an inappropriate expense going through. So some organizations have swung away from purchase order systems because, as Tina mentioned, that the various types of contracts you can have is you spend potentially more time managing exceptions to your policy than actually approving invoices and moving things through. So there's a balance between the efficiency and the risk management in the controls. Your controls are using a three-way match system. And as Tina mentioned, when we did the dive in, we did trip over something that didn't meet the three-way match. So it's a fine balance. My comment would be, you know, looking at your neighbors, looking at your at other regional districts. There's a fine balance to that efficiency versus risk management piece.
You're good, Director Hiltz? Thank you. Director Lee?
Thank you, Chair. On page 31, there's right at the very top, it's a discussion about financial plan amendments. And it seems like it's something bad about doing it multiple times, which I can't quite figure out how you'd avoid doing it when a project requires more money and there's nothing you can do. It's something you didn't foresee. But there's a suggestion that maybe some process change can stop it from happening. I don't understand what that could be, though.
Okay, we did address some of this, but I'm going to go back to Ms. Perot to address it.
Yeah, I think we're not trying to say that it's good or bad. We're just trying to understand what the implications are from a transparency and accountability perspective and internal controls. So, and again, just from a best practices perspective, and what we want to always do is you know, look outside and see what is the standard. And so in identifying some of this, we have mentioned earlier that sometimes the case is the delay to projects. So if it's a 2 or 3 year delay, you know, often the logic would be that you may, when you go to marketplace, get a different number. We also find sometimes there may be some scope amendments, and so is that a symptom of internal review? What are our processes to scoping project, and at what point do we do those types of things? And what degree do we want to do it? So I think that those are some of the considerations from an internal perspective to strengthen our processes, but also from a transparency and accountability as to if there's a consistency, maybe we aren't allowing enough contingencies into our projects. And so now I think there is more of a practice to provide some different types of contingencies in projects so we don't run into that. So I think it's also if we have projects that were unforeseen in our financial plan and we continue to add new projects, that really is probably not in the spirit of how the financial planning process for local governments is undertaken. Sometimes you'll have a grant that you won't find out the answer to later, but when you start to have new projects spur up all throughout the year, you may or may not want to do that because, again, that's just may not be consistent with your financial planning when you adopt your plan. That's the way local governments are, is we don't have a process for local government where we have continuous budgeting. So that in the marketplace is something that's quite fluid, but in local government is quite static. So we report only on our adopted financial plan in our financial statements. We don't have a column to say, and here is the amended budget and all the other things that we added and have a schedule to that. So that's not the practice. So it's just being mindful and understanding the implication and how the public can learn of these amendments.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Director Hiltz.
Thanks, Chair. On page 32, It's the contributed tangible capital assets, and I was just, the connection between the regional growth strategy, which is in capitals, which I'm not sure if we have actually a regional growth strategy, and how that intersection with contributed tangible capital assets. Just filling in some blanks between what we have and what we don't have and what we might have in the future. Thanks.
Mr. Wing?
Thank you, Chair. So the concept here is taking a more holistic view of tangible capital assets, and specifically contributed assets that are added to our asset listing when a new development comes online. So what the concept is taking a more holistic view, kind of back to the front of the process where growth strategy and where we anticipate growth and development to be, and building those into our long-term plans in terms of utility rates, asset management planning, and all the impacts that those have on the various services that we provide. So it's really building on the current processes that we have, but taking it a step further back to kind of the front end so that we have a little more foresight in terms of the planning aspect.
All right, directors, any additional questions? Director Hiltz.
Thanks, Chair. Last one. I think this is where the phrase is ongoing concern. And it sort of ties a little bit with Director McMahon's, the siloed effect that the corporation of the regional district as a going concern opposed to the individual services. And so, could we have a failing service and still being a going concern? One phrase I'm thinking of is the ports function is we're one significant storm away from a service collapse kind of idea. So just how, the corporation will stand. It's how does it relate to the individual services because of our accounting and the segmented reporting, or what I'm not sure where the service has to be in its own accounting silo. If you have just some general comments about that, and it's this regional district model that we're dealing with.
Who would like to address that? Corey, do you?
Sure. I can. Thank you, Director, for the question. Yes, absolutely. In the regional district model, the regional district as a whole really doesn't have a going concern issue, or it's not going to go away, short of a provincial, directive of any sort. But you do have the reality that every electoral area and every service has its own pot of money and has to be sustainable and have the budget attached to it. And I know that is a lot of work for staff to put together those budgets. Now, the question for service failure, I would say that I don't honestly know the answer. have not experienced a service failure in any regional district. We have been working with the village of Lytton through its disaster through the summer, and they are working through, and they exist still, even though there is no community at present. So in my experience, other levels of government have kicked in disaster to ensure that there is still service being provided. But I haven't experienced it to be able to give you what I've seen in practice.
Ms. Pro?
I think that really is from the regional district's perspective, the reason why we really focus on the sustainable service delivery and asset management planning, and understanding holistically as you have the assets and what you need to be able to deliver that service and how you need to fund it. So from the local government's perspective, we do have various sources of fundings to deal with, whether they're emergencies and whatnot. However, there are instances where we are on the hook. And so the decision is, at what point do you want to mitigate the possible financial burden to those taxpayers? So if we have a policy related to the floor that you want to have for reserves, so past boards have dipped and dipped and dipped because they didn't want to pass that on. So now we're kind of at a predicament where we're just on the fine line to be able to sustain ourselves. So those are things that you want to review as you're reviewing your assets. Now, the other thing too that we want to be mindful of, and it's identified in the management letter, is as we get into our asset retirement obligations and recognizing how that'll impact services, most certainly ports, will be a factor in another lens of how you need to contemplate sustainable service delivery in a lot of these localized service areas.
Another example on that is our solid waste. It is an
Correct.
underfunded liability.
Right, that we've been dealing with for 12 years.
All right, any further questions? Director Hills.
I'm sure this is my last one.
You said that last time.
Yeah, I missed one. It is my one. It's April. Citizen dashboards. I was looking at your website, and thanks for the website. There's actually, it's well laid out, and it helps me to understand kind of the service that you provide. So there is this, there's a lot of data that comes through. And I'm not a financial expert by any means, but I'm supposed to represent the general public in some way. So this idea of a citizen's dashboard has been talked about, and on your website you say it's one of the things that your company has done, I think. So if you have any comments about what that is, we've talked about kind of citizen budget kind of things.
Yeah.
So if you could, anything you could say about that, thanks.
Thank you, Director. Yeah, and I think you've hit the nail on the head. The use of the citizen dashboard and the examples that I've seen, I haven't been directly involved in any of these projects, but I have seen some of the results in other communities. Some prairie communities have had success with it. It's primarily used around a budget engagement tool. I know some communities will use it at the budget drafting, where you've got first reading, the budget might go up with some explanations, some citizen education pieces around, why do we do that this way, or what is, where do your taxpayer dollars go? What services does it go to? There's also an accountability piece, again, relating back to budget, that some communities will build in the reporting model and the ability to report back to citizens of say, okay, the dashboard was up for the budget process, and input can be facilitated that way, right? You can ask for input there and have the community involved. And then you can report back, whether that's quarterly or on an annual basis. So the citizens can pull up the dashboard, dive into some metrics, and I haven't, regional districts are a uniquely BC thing. I've seen it on the prairies. I don't know the level of detail that it dives into that you would be able to do an area by area. That's probably a larger project. An electoral area by electoral area. But I have seen it in some cities where they'll break it down into water, sewer, recreation, general, to be able to provide the budget to actuals, and those types of things for the citizens to be able to see it. Not necessarily on a live basis, because that's a whole nother level of integration and work, but on that reporting where you're getting some annual reporting or potentially some quarterly reporting that the citizens can look at.
A city that you would, as an example of where this was done, if you could, do you have anything in mind?
Yeah, Winnipeg comes to mind. I'm trying to think, potentially Fort McMurray. I know we've been working with them. I can find specific examples, and I've actually already connected Tina with the two leads there, one in Edmonton and one in Victoria. it's a bit of an IT focused thing because of the dashboard nature and the online presence. But I think I think those two communities, I know Winnipeg had a lot with their budget. We may not have been involved with Winnipeg's project, but that is where one of the examples that I think you could look at for that citizen engagement piece and how they navigate the budget process.
Thank you. Directors, any additional questions or comments? I think we're good. All right, so I'd like to move on to Annex B, because this is where the recommendations are with regards to the financial statements. Is there anything further you'd like to add, Ms. Pro?
Well, there is quite a bit to go over with this one because we have the statement of financial information and the Hillside audit that's included in here. So I don't know if you want to recess and maybe reconvene. I don't know if you'd like to do that. I don't know if there's going to be additional questions or if we would just want to slide through it because there is included in the agenda. I don't know if you noticed, but we have included the statement of financial information for adoption. Typically that's done in June as the deadline requires, but from a state of efficiency, staff felt this was a good process improvement for this year. So that's additional information that's included, as well as the independent audit report for the Hillside as a requirement of our Foreshore leases at Hillside to Flynn Road to the province to report on their revenue for the Foreshore leases. So otherwise, we have provided some metrics as well for some financial statements. It's a little bit more in depth, and we'd like to provide some of these in our annual report as well, which, you know, give a little more insight into things like our future financial plan and how, for instance, we're going to be using several millions of dollars for our financial plan, over $16 million of budgeted reserve to fund projects. And so from a financial health perspective, that's something that I think the board and the public should be mindful of, especially when we report significant surplus. However, those surpluses gets transferred, but I think those are very important to be able to get the financial sustainability of those particular services. Also from a debt management perspective, just being mindful, yes, our debt is going down, and from a percentage of revenue, however, there is over $26 million worth of debt funding that's in our financial plan. So we're going a different direction now. So we want to be very mindful of that as we take on more capital projects going forward. So I just wanted to highlight those, including the landfill reserve as we committed this year for an additional top up as we look to 2025 as being the final year of the landfill. And the Schedule 15, which is to comply to your COVID restart funding. So that's a schedule we've had for the last 2 years. And so otherwise, if there's any questions regarding the statement of financial information, both of those need to be adopted. So thank you.
Directors, any questions? We've got about 5 minutes until we're going to need to break. If there are a lot of questions, we could break now and actually have a break before the Day of Mourning celebration. Or if there are not many questions, we could potentially move this one forward. What would you like to do? Okay. Directors would like to take a break. All right. So IT, we are going to take a break. We'll be back at around 10:30, so about 5 minutes. Thanks. All right, so we are still live, and we are breaking now for a celebration or a memorial for a day of mourning. It's going to be led by our HR department. So you may not see them, but you will hear them.
Let's see. I think we're good. Okay. There we go. So, good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us here on this day of mourning, April 28th. April 28th has been one of the key days that's been recognized for celebrating workers who have lost their lives due to workplace illness or disease or injury. Today we want to honor and commemorate all those people who have given up their lives in the course of their work, and thank you all for joining us here today. I'd like to introduce you to Rondi Shanks, who is our Health and Safety Coordinator, and Rondi, if you'd like to say a few words, please.
Thank you, Jerry. Welcome, and thank you everybody for attending. So, yes, April 28th, we come together every year to honor those who have lost their lives due to workplace injury or illness. In BC, this year, or 2021 I should say, 161 workers died from a workplace injury or disease. 161. 2 were young workers. 99 workers died from a result of occupational disease, and 53 of those were a result of asbestos exposure. 13 workers died in 2021 as a result of exposure to COVID-19 in the workplace. So almost 3 work-related death claims are accepted every year by WorkSafe BC. So this is not only a day to come together to remember and honor those lives lost or injured due to workplace tragedy, but it's time for us to come together to renew our commitment and to collectively improve the health and safety in the workplace. And this is to prevent further injuries, illnesses, or death. At this time, I'd like to welcome Dean, and he has a few words that he would like to share.
Thank you very much, Jerry, Rondi, and April 28th, National Day of Mourning, is a very special day. And in the spirit of honoring those who have been seriously injured or lost their lives in the course of their duty, there is someone I would like to personally honor on this day as well, and that is a guy named Derek Salakin. Derek was a 28-year-old helicopter pilot that worked for the BC Wildfire Service, and he was based in Watson Lake. And on Tuesday, July 24th of 1994, I had been seconded from my regular job as a regional landscape inventory specialist who was mapping the visual landscape and doing visual quality objective ratings up in the Watson Lake area. They had lost someone off their initial attack crew, and I was seconded to be an initial attack firefighter in Watson Lake, Yukon. I was extremely excited about it because it was going to mean I was going to get to fly in a helicopter and fight forest fires, which was, as a 27-year-old at the time, working as a junior landscape inventory specialist, I was thrilled at the opportunity. And on Tuesday evening of July 26, 1994, I got my first fire call. It was going to be the 3rd time I would ever climb into a helicopter. And I was with my crew leader, a guy named Steve Abram, and Derek was our pilot. And as we lifted off from the initial attack base and crossed over Watson Lake and turned to go toward the column of smoke that we could see in the distance, the helicopter lost all power and we crashed from about 300 feet, which wasn't high enough for auto rotation. We ended up crashing into some trees at a very high rate of speed, and Derek was unfortunately killed on impact. Steve and I both survived. We spent a fair bit of time at the acute spinal injury unit at GF Strong. I was fortunate enough to be released with broken bones in my back after 8 days. Steve was there for about 30 days more. Everything we were told was that everything Derek did during that descent, up to and including the final words he said to us, which were, "This is going to hurt, boys. This is really going to hurt." He did everything he could to protect us, to protect Steve and I. He even put the machine down in a 20-degree bank angle to the right to maximize our chances of survival. Derek left a 6-month-old son. He was known as someone that was incredibly safety conscious, and he was known as someone that took meticulous care of his machine. I was thinking about this when I was pondering doing a brief talk today, and I thought, I wish I hadn't lost track of Steve. Steve Abram and I had met originally when we were in high school. I didn't see him for years. Then I'm on his crew in Watson Lake. I probably have the shortest career of any initial attack firefighter out there. But we lost track of each other about 18 or 20 years ago. And 2 weeks ago, after I knew I was doing this, I was in Kamloops visiting my kids, and we went to go to a driving range on Sunday. And as we were going to the machine to get the balls, I looked to my left and I'm like, "Hey, that's Steve. That's Steve right there." And I talked to him. He had met my boys when they were really young, but the size of my extended family now is a lot bigger. And Steve's a legend to my family, the guy that was in the helicopter crash with their dad. So they got to meet Steve and hang out with him and talk to him, and he told them all the story. And I ended up being able to take a photograph of Steve and I on that Sunday at the golf putting green. It was so wonderful to see him, and it's wonderful to be reconnected with him. He told me last night that his mom is still in contact with Derek's mom regularly. And I think that's wonderful. We didn't have an actual photo of Derek that we could get available for this, but I would like to honor Derek. I thank him. I thank him for the sacrifice he made, and I think it's representative of the sacrifice that so many workers who have lost their lives on the job have made. And in that spirit, thank you, Derek, and I'd now like to observe a minute of silence for all of those who have been injured or lost. Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone, and thank you to the board for participating today as well. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, and thank you to the board for participating today as well. It is an honor to be able to remember those we've lost. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We have a few staff in the room here. We'll just give them a moment to exit the room, and then we'll continue on with our meeting. All right, let us go back to Annex B in our agenda. And Tina, do you have anything further to add, or are you now open to questions?
Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you. Directors, questions on any of the items? Director Hiltz?
Yeah, schedule to payments to suppliers of goods and services is within scope of questions then? Okay, so there's, so what we had, so what I'm trying to understand is the 25,000 a accumulation over a year, or are they individual transactions? And I guess I'm wondering how it jives with the purchasing policy. So if a transaction, say if you have six $4,000, you need seven $4,000 purchases to exceed the $25,000, but it falls into the $15,000 to $25,000 of purchasing. They're different numbers, different systems. Do they all come together in some way? Because does purchasing policy align with the goods and services? And how, like I'm thinking of contracts that maybe should be in place that aren't. So is there a check to find out if there's a way to improve purchasing through this $25,000 exceeding amount of the, in Sophie?
Ms. Pro.
Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, we most certainly purchasing does an audit of the various types of transactions that occur. And if there is multiple supplier invoices that trigger different types of mechanism, most certainly the trade agreements, those would be the most important, and things that are over and above delegation authority. Because we have to ensure that we are being consistent with the purchasing policies and the various rules and regulations that we have. So we do have checks and balances in place to make sure that those are being followed. In the matter course, we may have also various different types of divisions that are using the same contractor, and so we do the same type of verification as well, because then we would potentially need to do like a bulk or a master service agreement with that contractor, and we're doing more and more of those as it relates to things like land clearing or tree removal that might be used by parks and infrastructure and those types of things. So we are doing those checks and balancing on a regular basis to ensure that those policies, procedures are adhered to.
Thank you. Director McMahon?
Yeah, I was just wondering about the Foreshore leases at Hillside. So we hold the lease and then we in turn sublet the Foreshore parcels to businesses that use the access. Is that how it works?
Yes, that is correct. So we have what's called the head lease with the province, and that particular head lease is actually the expiring December 2024, I believe. And so 2023, 2024. And so we are actively working with the province on that. And of course, the process to do that will be quite different than it has been in the past. And so, yes, we have multiple subleases associated with that. So things like coastland wood and whatnot. So what we would do as a process of the final audit is we then provide a supporting document to the ministry as far as who and how much those particular lease documents are. And so, or lease revenue. One of the other things that we did make a change for the financial statements for 2021 was that in the past we used to take the lease revenue and account for it as part of funding the development of the Hillside property. With the change now that there are no real active property that's for sale, so it's mostly raw undeveloped land, we actually accounted for that as revenue and didn't account for it as part of the land held for resale. So that was a change that we made this year. And so I think that's a more reflective accounting of the types of revenue that we're receiving. So the net to the regional district is about 50% of the total cost share with the province for the other 50%.
Yeah, follow up. I haven't seen the Foreshore lease, but I assume there are conditions, and who is responsible for ensuring that the Foreshore conditions are met? Is it us or is it the sub-lease holder? Like, I don't know, not setting off explosions on the Foreshore.
So the head lease would have terms and conditions of the regional district to abide by, and those same types of terms and conditions would then be most likely reflected in the sublease agreements to make sure that we're consistent with the head lease. So things like if the head lease were no longer in effect with the regional district, and those subleases may have to remediate if there's any structures or anything out there, they may have to remove them, and we have to leave the land and the foreshore as it was left in a natural state. So those are types of things through the asset retirement obligations we're also reviewing and making sure that our lease agreements and our obligations, such as the head lease with Hillside, are being reflected.
So I'm just going to follow up on that too. Just some clarification. We actually own the land. It's the foreshore that we have the lease with the province.
Correct.
Right. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
So there is a potential liability associated with this. For instance, if a lessee went bankrupt and disappeared, then we would be responsible for the cleanup afterwards. Would that be correct?
We may, however, we probably have some term that they leave it. So, I mean, then you'd be in a different state. We might be through litigation, et cetera, if someone actually went bankrupt and reneged on their obligations. I don't believe we're in any predicament of that nature. There's lots of requests. I do want to clarify too, Chair, if I may. The SCRD owns the undeveloped lands. However, there are a lot of individual owners and businesses that own those foreshore upland pieces that face the foreshore. The regional district doesn't have any that face the foreshore.
Directors, any additional questions? Director Hiltz?
Thanks. Yeah, I'm on page 104. It's the debt ratio. 2021, we were 4.2, and I seem to remember reading a report early in 2022 that we were at 10%, just if I remember. Is that? And so 15 is the, don't go over 15. So is there, I'm wondering about this projection, and you've been talking about being mindful of this ratio of where we're going to, and like, how do we keep track of it? Like, I guess, how do we avoid going over 15%, I guess, is kind of the short question. Thanks.
So there is a debt management policy that is board endorsed. It's a board policy. And so as part of that, some of the ratios are, so your debt repayments to revenue. So it's indicative. So the comparison to the 15% is where that aligns with the community charter. So member municipalities cannot exceed that 15%. So whenever they are issuing debt, that's one of the conditions that they have to prove through to Municipal Finance Authority that they meet those requirements. And it's just your financial health to be able to ensure that you don't default. Now, of course, just a reminder that the regional district also is the lack of a better term, the guarantor of our member municipal debt. That's the strength of our debt management in the province, is to be able to do that in our AAA ratings with the Municipal Finance Authority. So it's to be, the policy has been consistent because it is a good standard practice. So as we start to take more of these debt issuances on, we may have to revisit that, because we may get to a point, because a regional district actually does not have a ceiling as to, it doesn't have that 50% cap. So from a financial health, if our member municipal counterparts are having to have that in place, then the policy then has reflected that. So if we do go over, I think there would have to be a discussion with the board as far as what would be the plans if there was any downturn in the economy, for instance, or our ability to recover that. How would we do it? What would the debt term payments, how long are we in these debt payments? Are they long-term debt, 20, 25 years? Are they just short-term payments? So I think those are all the factors. If you were starting to approach that higher level, you'd have to consider.
Follow-up question on that one. Does that 15% also include the member municipalities' debt, or is that just the regional district's debt?
From the debt management policy, it just reflects the regional district's debt. if the board wanted to reflect, then that would be quite a significant change because, of course, that would be a much higher number.
Yes, all right, thank you. Director McMahon.
Yeah, because I'm a wee bit of a local government geek, every year I look up SOFI reports. And hitherto, we geeks knew to find them in June in the financial statements. So now it's going to be harder because we've just done this in April, which is great. But I'm wondering if we're going to provide more, as Director Hiltz would say, breadcrumbs to the public in finding some of this information on our website.
I think that's definitely something from a financial disclosure perspective is one of the opportunities we have with our website redesign. So providing more information, and that's what we're building on with the budget page, but I think that's what we're trying to do for a financial reporting, variance reporting, and those types of things. So again, I think short answer is yes.
So again, to follow up on that one, will this also now show up in our annual report?
The statement of financial information. So that's an interesting question because typically what happens with a regional district is like annual reports are not mandated as they are with municipalities through the community charter. So we can choose to include some different information. Right now we don't include statement of financial information in our annual report. I don't know if there's a consistency in the sense of how municipalities disclose some of this additional information. So those could be things that, from a regional district perspective, because we're not mandated, we do have some flexibility in what we include and what we don't include. From our standpoint, we include things in alignment with the Government Finance Association's guide to financial reporting. So that hasn't been something that's been identified as the regional district as a process improvement, but that's something we could explore.
Thank you. Any further questions? Seeing no further questions, there are some recommendations on page 101. Directors. Director Pratt.
I will move the recommendations on page 101, please.
And that's been seconded. Seeing no further questions, all those in favor? Thank you. Thank you, Corey, Christy. Thank you for hanging around. Thank you. We're going to move on to Annex C. And this is chair appointments to standing committees and a conversation on standing committees. So I'm going to introduce this and then I will, on a couple of them, I'm going to go to staff on. This report actually is moving forward a change in the committee structure from the standing committees that we've had for many, many, many years and moving to Committee of the Whole, Electoral Area Services Committee, and Board. This is something that has been a conversation for many years at the regional district. It's actually been a conversation of our board. And when the Remuneration Committee did their work last year, I believe, they actually recommended we move to this as well. The timing is to ensure that we and staff have sufficient time to work with these committees before the election. At the election, we could have the chair come in and move them totally back, right? Given that we have August off, we are looking at implementing May 6th. So we would have May, June, July, and September. So we have 4 months basically to work with this new structure to see whether or not it works for staff, whether it works for the board. So that's why the timing is as it is. And then I wanted to go to Sherry to talk about the Board Policy Review Committee and Budget Committee.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll speak to the Policy Review Committee first. So as we were considering the structure, we were contemplating a Committee of the Whole and an Electoral Area Services Committee. But there was, the chair also recognized an opportunity to address the ongoing work that is necessary for policy review. So when you think about board committees, a select committee is typically structured for a specific purpose, and then once their mandate is fulfilled, that committee would be dissolved. By creating a policy review standing committee, we have provided an ongoing opportunity for the board to do a regular check-in on their policies, which might be a good practice to adopt going forward in the future. Similarly, we talked about establishing either a budget or a finance committee. I think part of the thinking around that might have been a public perception opportunity. So when we schedule a special corporate and administrative services committee, does the public recognize that we are taking an opportunity to talk about budget? But if we are scheduling a budget or finance committee, I think that's probably a lot clearer. And then also we have determined that there's probably roughly 6 meetings per year where we could strictly bring forward items of business that were finance and or budget related. So I hope that helps explain some of the thinking around the structure.
Thank you. Director McMahon.
Great. Before diving into the weeds, because I have a lot of questions, I just want to clarify where we are on the consultation scale right now. This is the first time this has been on an agenda at a committee, and I note that it has already been actioned by staff. The new committee structure is on our website now. So are we being consulted or are we being informed? And if the committee chose not to affirm the recommendations in this report, then what would happen?
Thank you. In my case, I would say that you're being informed at this point. And did you want to speak to that?
So per the Local Government Act, the main reason for bringing the report into public meeting is, it's frankly, for public transparency, so that we are rolling it out to the public. The schedule's not changing. So we've tried to do it in a way where the public may or may not even notice. It'll be similar to a rebrand. So the committee times will be at the same time. The schedule is not changing. Some of the items on the agenda may change, but we already do shuffle things around somewhat to address our business. So in terms of the board's role and what would be approved today, I would be seeking board approval of the terms of reference specifically, but the establishment of the committees and the appointment of members to those committees is strictly under the authority of the board chair.
Thank you. Director McMahon, follow up?
Well, I will point out that you can lead a director to a committee, but you can't make them chair. So it's, appointing chairs should involve some consultation. I do have a number of questions about committees in terms of reference, particularly the Policy Review Committee, because this looks, the way it's being incorporated, as a committee that would be meeting in public on Zoom. And I wonder if that's really a good idea, because I think for the purposes of policy review and some of the discussions that are likely to ensue about policies and previous experiences of boards and committees, that a working committee might be more appropriate to work on policy and then present recommendations to the standing committees.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. So the open meeting rules would dictate that the public does have the right to observe the board's business as it's being moved forward. And if there are specific items that the Policy Review Committee were to be discussing that met Section 90 of the Community Charter to warrant it being a closed meeting for those purposes, then we would move those items of business into closed meeting.
Yeah, we have had a couple of working committees. One of them was the committee that was appointed to review remuneration. And another one was, I can't remember, we had a committee, we did a policy review and we brought findings to the board. So how do those differ?
Thank you for the question. The Remuneration Task Force Committee was actually a citizen committee that was appointed to come forward to the board with specific recommendations. So in that sense, it was an advisory committees. But committees of the board are subject to the open meeting rules. And so the public should be able to attend those meetings and observe the business as it moves forward. There's a very actually narrow definition of what would be considered a working session for directors. So if the business of the regional district is being moved forward and policy is definitely moving forward the business of the regional district, we would have to conduct that as an open meeting, in my opinion.
Thank you. Director Pratt.
Thanks. So first off, regarding policy, it does need to be done in public. It's that's one thing I feel I've dealt with a lot of policy issues in the last 13 and a half years as being elected, and it is difficult to do it. There's a lot of homework that needs to be done on the back end with anything with policy, because otherwise you end up debating questions and commas and semicolons in the policy documents. And so going back to the process piece then, what do we do with our other standing committees? Do we need to have a board resolution in dissolving those? And I guess if this is at the sole discretion of the chair, then it's not even necessary to bring it to board for a recommendation to be adopted, because it would need to happen today if that was necessary. But from what I'm understanding is this, like, whatever happens, whatever the chair decides is with select committees and chair appointments and everything is going to happen, and it doesn't need a board endorsement.
I would also suggest that the committee terms of reference is something the board should be discussing and approving as a board. So the chair established the committees, appoints members to the committees, but the board should still be reviewing the terms of reference. So I would request that a decision today with respect to terms of reference come forward, and if there is something to be implemented, I would also request that we move that direct to board for adoption.
And the question around if this is moving forward, then what happens with the other select committees, infrastructure, community, or all of our other 4 standing committees?
Once we have adoption of a new committee terms of reference, we would resolve to dissolve the existing standing committees as established.
Okay, but that would come likely not at the board meeting this afternoon. That would be within May.
Whatever the board decides, whatever action you decide today, it can either go direct to board or we can push it to the next board meeting.
Okay, if that's up to board. So I'm a little bit frustrated by how this process has gone on. So, and I understand that it's under the direction of the chair, and we did have this discussion when the Remuneration Review Committee came out, and there was no appetite at the board at that time to go to this kind of structure. So I think I was really, I was surprised and disappointed that there was no consultation with the committee chairs or even the vice chair of the board when this happened. So it's, so if there's a bit of frustration that's being sensed by any of the directors, I think that's just been voiced right now between what's been said already. So we're kind of like, okay, well, I guess, does it matter what we have to say or not at this point? So, I mean, I have other thoughts, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. So
I can own that. Yep. Right, I own that. I also recognize that in order to move this forward in May, we were all in concert and conventions. Some people were there, some people were not there. We were trying to get meetings together and they never happened. So I own it, yes. And I know that there's frustration on the part of the board that this was not, they were not consulted and this was set up in this way. So I apologize for that and we're still moving forward. Director Command?
Yes, I feel that if the proposal was strong enough, it should have been carried on its own merits. It didn't have to be railroaded. I do have some concerns about the allocation of subjects between the different committees. And I would be happy to get into that, but perhaps some of the other directors had other issues they want to discuss first. I'm particularly concerned with the Electoral Service Committee, Electoral Area Services Committee.
So you're talking about which items will show up on which committee? Okay, and that I'd go refer back to staff? This is, so how do we determine which agenda items will show up on which agenda?
Thank you, Chair. So the two regularly scheduled committees that have been recommended thus far, Committee of the Whole and Electoral Area Services Committee, the differentiation between the two is essentially who votes. So all of the SCRD services that involve one or more rural areas but do not involve any municipal votes would be allocated to an Electoral Area Services Committee. The terms of reference have been structured in such a way that the list can be amended and the matters outside of the mandate of the committee may be considered as necessary. So if there's an item scheduled for the Electoral Area Services Committee where we have strictly rural area directors voting, but there's a desire to have that discussed by the board, we can easily move that to a Committee of the Whole. So I think the intention is to provide some flexibility in terms of what report goes on to what agenda. But primarily, the Electoral Area Services Committee would be composed of the rural area directors, who would be the voting members for the items on that agenda.
Follow up?
I'm going to come back to this. I'll let other people speak first.
Thank you. Director Hiltz?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I'm going to, the membership versus the voting, and for all intents and purposes, we've been operating as committees of whole, and we decide through the voting block as who's voting. So I'm just wondering about the membership. So in the EA Services Committee, the intent is to kind of do away with those lines that say these are the people voting? Or would we still have these blocks that says these are the people voting? I'm just trying to decide, is membership a necessary part of it, or does it constrain it? Because if you wanted to take something from a time sensitive and you wanted to put it in the EA, could you have other people voting on it who are not members, I guess, is the question. Thanks.
Thank you for the question. The board procedure bylaw is currently the mechanism that determines voting at committee for the board. So while we could take an item from an Electoral Area Services Committee and move it to a Committee of the Whole, based on the appointments as they are now of just the rural directors, I would not recommend having an item with a municipal vote appear on an agenda for an Electoral Area Services Committee.
Just for the board's information, when I was on the board first term, the voting was not as it is now. So that is up to the board to determine who votes on these various items. So electoral area items that came forward to any of the committees at that time were voted on by all directors, not just electoral area directors. That was a change that happened 2 terms ago. So during the 2014-2018 timeframe. And that was a board decision as to who votes on those.
That's correct. Committee voting by default would be all directors 1 vote each, and the rules of the Local Government Act would apply at the board meeting.
Thank you. Director Lee.
Thank you, Chair. today, when I'm looking back in history to try and find an item, I generally can search through, say, all of the CAS meetings and find it that way, because there is no effective search way of finding past items. How do you imagine it being able to find something now that everything is random through multiple meetings?
So you're saying right now, if it's infrastructure, it shows up on an infrastructure meeting?
Yeah, and so I can
Right.
look through the infrastructure agendas for a year, for instance,
Right.
and quite quickly find what I'm looking for by going just through the agendas.
Okay, so in this case, if it would be an item that, like a development variance permit or something, that would be on the EA agenda. Anything else would be on the committee of the whole.
Yeah, so I'd have to look through all the committees of
Yes.
the whole. I guess I could still find it, I just twice as long to find it.
Maybe.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Director Ties?
Yes, thank you, Chair. The one thing that I really enjoy about the Planning and Community Development Committee, or I guess it's not just the Planning Committee set up right now, is that Director Toth, who is not an electoral area director, was chairing it, and that gives those that are actually concerned around the subject matter more freedom to not have to stick handle a meeting while at the same time having to be part of it and be actively engaged. So that is one factor that I would sorely miss in the new electoral areas directors committee, and I think that it'll be a lot more complicated, especially for the chair to handle that in the future. So I'm just wondering if any consideration's been done towards that, or if there's any other better solutions that could be found.
So that'd be a question I'd have for the corporate officer. Can somebody who is not a member of a committee actually chair the committee?
I would suggest they would have to be a member of that committee, and I would have to look into it in terms. Actually, no, the procedure bylaw would guide the voting rules. So, yes, as long as the chair was a member of the committee, it would be fine, but the chair would still have to abide by the rules per the procedure bylaw if it's a municipal member.
So the municipal members are not members of the Electoral Area Services Committee?
If you appoint one, yes. That member would not likely be voting on many of the
Yes.
items that go there, though.
Yes. Okay, so that's an option. So Director Toth will need to think about whether or not he wants to continue to do that. We'll come back to that. Director McMahon?
On that subject, my suggestion is that all the directors be appointed to the committee with the expectation that they're not necessarily going to attend, because items that the municipalities vote on will not be on the agenda of that committee. And then that solves the problem, because people can attend or they can chair without being an electoral area director. I was going to comment that some of the items that are on the EA terms of reference, I have difficulty seeing there. Like, the libraries are all in the same service for the regional district, even though they're separate libraries. So dividing them up and putting them on two different set of agendas strikes me as a poor idea. Similarly, the fire departments, they share common issues, and it makes sense to me that we should look at those groups together, even though we're not necessarily voting on everything. And refuse collection is another one, because I realize that the contract is with the rural areas, but there is a long-standing concern that the municipalities and the regional district should get it together with our refuse collection and like enter into a similar contract rather than trying to administer different contracts all over the Sunshine Coast. So I think that while there is a good argument to be made for having an electoral services committee to deal with the electoral area voting issues, that should be fairly narrow in range. I mean, the planning issues alone, plus things obviously like our grant and aid, that's quite a lot of items by themselves. My comments.
Thank you. Director Pratt?
Thanks. So with Committee of the Whole, with all bylaw compliance issues being there, many of the bylaw compliance issues that we have are specific to the rural areas. I guess water conservation regulations would be one that is more region, yet a lot of, we're talking a lot of the bylaw issues and complaints are specific to the rural areas. So that's one I'm wondering if it could be, if it's issue specific, if that's something that could be more electoral areas based, or is there the flexibility in the way the terms of reference are written to be that way, I guess, if that makes sense to the corporate officer.
Yes, thank you. So bylaw compliance has been put into Committee of the Whole because the rural directors, as well as the Seashelt Indian Government District, is a member of that service.
Director Toth?
Thank you. I just wanted to sort of echo Director Lee's concerns. The breadcrumbs or, the search function of our website is quite terrible. It is supposed to be changing, but, until I see proof that it's functionally better, I think it's going to make it harder for residents to find information, whether it's updates on the water for the season or garbage collection issues or a particular planning file. I know that, the District of Seashelt search function is probably just about as terrible. And Director McMahon earlier asked me about the Sophie report, and it's only because I intuitively knew when we received them that I was able to go in and just manually check agendas, because the search results just don't spit it out. With regards to carving up as sort of electoral services versus everything else, I think, the SCRD is quite complex compared to a lot of other regional districts around the province, just with the sheer number of services that we have. Some fire departments are in one, some are in the other, libraries are split up. It's challenging for sure. Just comments, concerns. Thank you.
Thank you. Director McMahon?
Right. I was going to ask about animal control, but I assume that the answer again is that SIGD is involved in animal control. Ports and docks is another one that, while it is, again, an electoral services area, I can see that with upcoming discussions that we need to have about management and future of ports and docks, they're part of a regional transportation network. And we wouldn't want to go too far without considering any of the implications involving the municipalities as well.
Thank you. CAO?
Thank you. Yeah, just further to Director Toth and Director Lee's comments about searchability, as staff looks to operationalize the chair direction on the committee structure, we're becoming very well aware of how hard it is to find things. And working with the Office of the CAO and the new executive assistants and looking for things ourselves with these people being new and not having corporate memory, we are also butting up against how difficult it is to find things easily. It is a key item that we're trying to address with the new webpage. But even with the existing committee structures, and even though Director Lee would typically look in CAS for CAS items and infrastructure for infrastructure items, one of the things the chair had identified in this new committee structure is we're already using sometimes the CAS meeting as a de facto committee of the whole, because we end up dumping things from other agendas onto that. So even that, your ability to find things is only as good as whether or not the right item was on the right agenda. So it's still challenging.
Thank you. Director Lee?
Thank you, Chair. I've always enjoyed and appreciated the municipal director's input when discussing rural area services. And I would actually hate to lose that. So I would like to see that EA Services Committee policy changed to say that all directors may attend and only rural directors are voting. But I don't know if the municipal directors would feel that's a waste of their time and not want to attend. So maybe we make their attendance optional, something like that. I'd be interested to hear what the other directors think on that matter.
Thank you. Director Hiltz?
Yeah, lots of pieces. So just looking at the report itself, typically the reports say the purpose of this report is to do this. And so this report has no purpose, essentially, as far as I can see. I'm assuming it's for efficiency and things like this. But I would be interested in that. And I agree with I'm moving towards agreement on the EA as, it's like almost another committee of the whole, but with a focused area of the EA systems, so we're kind of taking the existing committees, shuffling them a little bit, renaming them, but almost ending up the same place, kind of. So I'm hoping that the reason is, getting things on the agenda, moving it forward, not having month delays is part of it, but I'd like to hear kind of some of what we're expected to get out of this change. Like what benefits are we going to receive, the regional district, from going in this direction? So, thanks.
Okay, so there are other regional districts in the province who do this, including, where did our corporate officer go? Cowichan Valley Regional District. And shortly after she moved there, they implemented the committee of the whole structure. They found it much more effective, much more efficient, particularly with staff who right now have one meeting a month in order to deal with whatever it is that they're looking at bringing forward. Either they have to rush and get the report done, or they have to wait for another month to bring that forward. This way they have 2 meetings a month. And I mean, we could still potentially see, and this is going to be up to the directors or the managers of each department, GMs. The infrastructure department might choose to use the second committee of the whole each month. They might choose to do that. But if there is something that requires immediate attention, rather than having to put it on another agenda, which we have been doing over the last while, they can bring it to the committee of the whole. So they're going to have more flexibility around their schedules with their meetings and bringing the items forward. Other than that, behind the scenes, it's going to stay fairly similar. So I mean, we can look at the EA piece that the board is requesting, and Councillor Toth Director Toth can look at whether or not he'd like to take on chairing again, and we can revisit that. Director Pratt.
Thanks. Regarding, I think I've said what I want to say about the terms of reference. So what I would like to push for right now is for the Policy Review Committee, I'd like our chair and vice chair of that to be Director Toth and Director McMahon, and members of all the board. I'd also like to say for the Budget Committee, I'd like to revisit who the chair and the vice chair are, just because of their time constraints, and when the Budget Committee will likely be meeting again, which will be this fall. And I have a concern with the chair and the vice chair of the proposed chair and vice chair of those committees being able to put the time and energy into that. I know the Budget Committee probably won't be meeting again until the fall. Other than that, the terms and reference in regards to the items and the makeup of the Electoral Area Services Committee, I mean, I'm happy to go with what the other EA directors have to say. However, I would like to, I do feel that they are all very competent and confident individuals, and I believe that we can handle this on our own without the municipal directors. It is nice to have the municipal directors' feedback, especially when we're looking at issues of boundary issues, I'll say. And I know that's one thing that's key that's come up a few times, especially within the last few months. And as we move forward to a more cohesive working relationship amongst all of the levels of municipal government on the coast, it is nice to be able to have that carry through. Other than that, I think I've been fairly succinct in the rest of my comments, but those were the other things I wanted to say, so thanks.
Thank you. So you suggested a chair for the Policy Review Committee would be Director Toth?
Director Toth and Director McMahon.
Okay, Chair and Vice
They're
Chair?
both, I see the shake of the head, but I will say my push for that is having worked with them on a couple of other policy items around the director's responsibilities, and they're both very thoughtful. They both have a broad breadth of experience. They both like to get into that kind of thing, and I'm impressed with both of them in that way, which is why I would highly support and suggest that. Sorry to put you on the spot like that, but that's my suggestion. I realize it's not my decision, but I'm putting it out there. And then just another plug for just changing around the chair and the vice chair for the Budget Committee. Thanks.
Thank you. Director Toth, would you be willing to take that on?
I'm actually not sure that I can chair a policy committee right now. I think there's a substantial research commitment to be chairing that committee, and the research component of it is not something that I've got bandwidth for right now. I'm happy to chair the Electoral Services Committee because I only need to know the agenda. I don't need to know the background information necessarily or do a lot of deep research on it. Happy to vice chair the Policy Committee, but I don't think I'm in a position to chair it at this time. Thanks.
Thank you. And I know Director McMahon had indicated she had interest in being in that committee. Would you be interested in taking on chair of that committee?
Potentially, but we also have to figure out what's happening with the EA committee, because I wouldn't do both. There's no way.
All right. So we've got some questions. All right, Director Ties.
Yeah, since our remuneration is no longer dependent on the attendance at meetings, I think there's no damage to be done by having the electoral areas committee with all directors being welcome to it. And I would be happy to have Director Toth continue to be chair of that committee if he's willing and able. I think that would be a great solution.
Director Toth?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. I can't currently sit on that committee, but we'll hash all this out, right?
That's right. All right, Director McMahon.
I've been building some things up. Yes, I would rather have Director Toth as chair. If we were absolutely stuck, I would chair the EA committee just because my areas probably had fewer contentious items coming onto the agendas lately, but I'd rather not. I strongly feel, as I said before, that all the directors should be welcome to attend, should be members of the EA committee. Attendance is always optional. So, if it's not relevant, they don't come. The Budget Committee right now is looking like the Mayor's Committee, and given that the taxation impacts for the electoral areas are much larger than for the municipalities, I think that at least one of the chair and vice chair should always be an EA director on that committee. And the task group we had recently, I finally remembered, was we wrote the job descriptions for the chair and directors. And frankly, that's not something that you do in a meeting. We did it online. I don't know if we ever met. So, the policy thing will be sort of interesting to manage because it's a lot of reading, it's a lot of research, and a lot of working individually and then maybe coming together with drafts or something like that. A very detail-oriented person who likes research might be well qualified to be on such a committee.
Are you appointed to Director Hiltz? Andreas, he's looking at his feet. He's not making eye contact. So I guess there's a request for Director Hiltz to be on the policy committee.
Whereabouts on the policy committee? We're vice chair. I'd be happy. Can I just say something about the vice? What's we're no longer scorekeeping for pay, right? So vice chair, chair, and the term co-chair up there. Going. The idea that the chair is more flexible now. Within a meeting, I'm not sure how a corporate manager there has to be a presiding officer, but can we on the fly, okay, your item is this, now this is, can we do this now? So I'm thinking kind of almost in a mentoring kind of a thing.
You always could do that.
But they had to, you always could, but it hasn't been there, because if you're the,
Need policy for that.
Right.
So I'll speak to what happened previously. What would happen was if the director was chairing the meeting, but it was an item from their area, they would actually turn over the chairing to one of the other directors for that item and then resume the chair after the item. That's always been an option. Right? It's something you can do in any meeting. So it's not something we have to put in place. It's already in place.
In place, but not practiced. So I'm thinking as a practice more, it could be kind of, it's an interesting thing, because I'm not a chair really of anything. Of the board review policy committee, oh God. I would prefer not to be the chair, but I'm sure I'd be the vice chair I could become a policy wonk. Sure, I can dive into that one, I suppose, we're talking, and we don't know the frequency of that yet, so, yeah. I'm turning my mic off.
But you had turned your mic on for something else. Was that about the chair piece?
The connecting, I'm going to use this term that we've been using more and more, the decoupling of attendance and performance and chair and vice chair and kind of flattening the hierarchy in some ways is what I'm sort of seeing is, and to be a shared chair rather than just the expectation is this person is Director McMahon and I in our agenda reviews, we kind of work together as almost equals, I would say. But it's an interesting way to kind of look at how in the future it could be that it's more collaborative between the chair and the vice chair, perhaps, that it hasn't really been as explored. So turning the potential into more practice. So that's one of the kind of co-benefits I'm sort of seeing of this rejigging of the system. Thanks.
All right, Director Pratt.
So with the committee of the whole, and with having the co-chairs, so Director Ties and I can just rock, paper, scissors every month or based on schedule, is what I'm thinking. Do we want to be more explicit in the terms of reference?
In what way? To say that you need
Well,
to be, like that you would chair the first one and he would chair the second one or something?
Well, yeah, something like that. In 3.2, it says the chair and vice chair of the committee. It should be, it's a semantics piece but it should say co-chair and co-vice chair. It really should be spelled out there in the terms of reference, because that is what it is. It just as just a couple of thoughts, but I'm curious because I can tell you right now, I'm not here on May 6th. I'm back for the next week. So, the first one in May, I wouldn't be able to do.
Right, so that between you could sort out.
Yeah.
Staff would need to know who's chairing.
Yeah.
So they make sure that the agendas go to the right person, but other than that, it's up to you to sort it out. Okay, Director Hiltz, your hand is still up. Is this up again, or you're done? Okay, Director Lee?
Thank you, Chair. I guess no one told Director Ties and I that only one of us needed to attend the reviews, because we both go to the reviews of the committee we're on now. And I think the vice chair and the chair attending the reviews should be almost a standard practice, because that's what the vice chair is for, and they should be fully aware. So then I wonder about the committee of the whole. If you have co-chairs, do you need vice chairs? But I would rather see that the chair and the vice chair were assigned to a committee well ahead of time, and they remain the same. So one does A, one does B, or one does one does two. It would give, it would get rid of the ambiguity. Anyways, it would make it clear. It would make it clear who's responsible for what. And I think that's always good, not to have any doubt about who's responsible for what.
But that doesn't necessarily need to be in the terms of reference. That can be something that can be outside of that. So one of you can, one vice chair can work with one chair. Whoever you choose, right? It might be you, sorry. Maybe it's Andreas and Alton and Lori and you. Whatever, you guys can sort that out. And then as Director Pratt's saying, you guys look at the calendar, and it might be that you say, this is how we're going to do this going forward, and advise staff. Yes, we're going to do the first one each month. These two are going to do the second one each month. But then there's the flexibility to change it should, the schedules, personal schedules, not allow you to be there. And then between you guys can sort that out. As long as staff are aware, they'll just work with that.
Sounds like it should work to me then. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. All right, Director Ties.
Yeah, just a little concern around agenda reviews. I think we would want to figure out who's chairing well before the agenda review, so that we don't need to have all four directors show up for that. And now that we've moved our agenda reviews to more than a week before, I think, there should be an adequate timeline set in place for letting staff know. And I don't know if that needs to be in the terms of reference.
I think you guys can work that out. The four of you can sort out what that would look like and let staff know. Director McMahon? Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to add, if the directors prefer, I think what was envisioned is there's two committee of the wholes per month, and that would be a lot for one chair and one vice chair to take on. So we can easily assign committee of the whole 1, committee of the whole 2, if that provides more clarity, and or we can leave it as is if the directors wish more flexibility.
So that's over to the directors. We'll go to Director McMahon while you think about that.
Well, since you asked, I don't know. I don't have an opinion. But I do want to know who else wants to volunteer for the policy committee, because so far I have heard myself and Director Hiltz be tasked on this, so looking for other volunteers.
All right. Do you want to get into that now? Any other directors want to be on that? Sure. Director Toth?
I love policy, so for me,
Director Pratt?
it's just a no-brainer.
Thank you. Director Ties, Director Lee, did you want to be on there as well? Yes, Director Lee?
Oh, look, it's turning into another committee.
I just going to turn it into the committee of the whole. Director Ties?
I'm good, thank you.
And so I've got McMahon, Chair, Hiltz, Vice Chair, and I've got Toth, Pratt, and Lee. I'm not going to put myself on the committee. I think as Chair of the board, I can attend, but don't have to necessarily be at every one. Is that correct?
Yes, so any director can attend. If you're not appointed to that committee, you probably won't be voting. Okay.
All right. Director Toth.
Thank you. Just coming back to the committee of the whole conversation, I think the appointment of a chair and a vice chair for committee 1 and committee 2, I think is a good idea. You know, Director Lee sort of mentioned that between, you know, if you had 2 co-chairs, well, one chair is one and the other chair is the other, and because the vice chair doesn't do anything unless the chair is actually unavailable for the meeting. And I think, you know, if somebody's unavailable, like Cass this morning, the vice chair was unavailable, we just appoint another vice chair. So yeah, I think spelling it out, who's on which, is a good idea, but at the same time, it also kind of feels like we're picking teams. Like, so, yeah, I don't know, but.
Director Hiltz.
I'm going to weigh into the cow 1, cow 2 topic because, yeah, just for, you know, at this point to know which one is which, if you were to say cowing, well, which cow are we talking about? So having some way to demarcate them and the breadcrumbs thing, you know, what's in cow 1 opposed to just look at cow, I can see that as a useful thing. I can see, so having a little bit more clarity at this, and maybe we go a bit more rogue after, you know, 4 months, but at this point, a little bit more kind of framework around it. I'm thinking that's where I'd like to go as well.
Thank you. Director Pratt.
Okay, a couple of thoughts, because yes, if there's a couple of different ways of looking at it. If you have 2 co-chairs, do you need the vice chair, or have 2 vice chairs, or maybe it's just 1 vice chair, and then that way you have 2 co-chairs and then 1 vice chair that you can pull up if needed. The scheduling, though, definitely, I think that's something that needs to be a little bit more firm. To my way of thinking, cow 1, cow 2, it doesn't matter if the chairs of the co-chairs know when they're going to be chairing. I think it is what it is, and having that schedule set ahead of time, I think that's something that Director Ties and we could sit down and we could probably both look at a calendar and go, okay, this is what I can do, this is what you can do, and we can get it settled in probably by later on this afternoon, I would imagine. Right, Director Ties? Yeah, so I'm not so worried about that, but I think we might be overladen with vice chairs. It's just a thought. So I do actually like then again, rather than having, if you have 2 co-chairs that are both prepared to chair every meeting, it is a little bit cumbersome. I know with Director Ties' business, that's going to be, it's going to be more challenging, I would imagine, for his schedule than it is for mine. But my schedule tends to be a little bit more flexible right now. So, but we'll figure it out. It's a change.
I think the reason we were looking at 2 chairs and 2 vice chairs was because of the workload. Because if you're on both meetings, you are reviewing agendas twice a month. Right? On a Thursday night, you're reviewing agendas twice a month. So by having two pairs, you only do one. I mean, if your schedules work that, Director Ties is not available on one and you're willing to take that on, it works. But that's up to you then. And that's not something that needs to be in the terms of reference. That's the implementation piece that can be handled offline. Okay. Any other questions or comments? Okay, so what I'm hearing from directors is that they would prefer that the Electoral Area Services Committee include, comprised of all directors. So on 3.1, on the terms of reference for Electoral Area Services Committee, is comprised of all directors of the Sunshine Coast Regional Board. That's a change I'd like to see made. And then the chair and vice chair, they're requesting that Director Toth be chair of that committee. And are you okay with taking on the chair of that committee? Okay. Great, your last name's Toth, right? Okay. And then vice chair of that committee is Director Hiltz, who is now vice chair of the Board Policy Review Committee. Are you okay with having both? You're good? Okay. And then Budget Committee, there was talk of changing up the director, the chair and vice chair. Now this is going to be interesting because the chair and vice chair of this committee, we're not actually going to be doing budget till after the election. So whoever's on this will change come the election. So all of these assignments at this point will have to be revised come the election. So sorry, go ahead, Director Toth.
Let's make Director Beamish chair.
I'm okay with that. I know he's not here. Director McMahon.
I realize that this committee may not meet before the election unless, of course, we have to do another financial plan amendment, which we're not supposed to be doing. But as a precedent, having the two mayors chair and vice chair that, I don't care for it. Much as it's fun to voluntold Mayor Beamish when he's not here, I would suggest that somebody else take on the vice chair of budget. Who is underused at the moment?
Can I make a suggestion?
Yeah, go ahead.
Just as a suggestion, because it is budget, is I would actually support the chair and the vice chair of the board being chair and vice chair of that committee, because to me it makes the most sense. I know, I'm sorry, Director McMahon, I know your cup runneth over with committee appointments. Yeah, however, I would suggest that maybe in the terms of reference, it's actually stated that the chair and the vice chair of the board shall be the chair and the vice chair of the committee, of the budget committee.
Director McMahon?
And I would disagree with that, just because you might end up with a situation again where the electoral areas were not represented as chair or vice chair of the committee. For right now, if you want to volunteer me for a committee that won't meet, I'm fine with that. Thank you.
Okay, so I've got all that, I think, and I'll revisit that. One of the things that has been brought forward, which may have us move the budget committee to not be looked at this meeting, is there's been a request by our chief financial officer to change it from a budget committee to a finance committee and just expand the scope a little bit. So rather than just doing the 5-year financial planning, so I'm on page 112, right, and pre-budget planning, budget proposals, and post-budget debrief. There was just in the last week or last few days that there was a Capital Regional District put together a finance committee, and this is what they put in as their duties or mandate. They've got corporate budget process, financial monitoring, reporting, and forecasting, corporate financial management, including policies and audit compliance, grants reporting and policies, financial impacts related to strategic board priorities and initiatives. So I would suggest we refer this one back to staff, these terms back to staff, and that they revise this and bring that one back to us. Director Toth.
Just a process question for staff, because at least with the municipalities, your standing committees can consist of members of the public as well. Is it the same with the regional districts?
Yeah, so the chair may appoint members to the board committees. At least one of the members must be an elected official, but it does extend to members of the public as well.
So I guess the follow-up to that is that if we expand it to be a finance committee, are we interested in having some public participation on that? Because we know that there's a lot of people in the community that are interested in budget process and the finances of the organization. So it might be an opportunity, if we're referring this back to staff, to have them look at that too.
Director McMahon.
Yeah, having just volunteered for the committee that I thought wasn't going to meet, I'm wondering how broadly one wants to expand the terms of reference to that. So I appreciate, staff taking a second look at it, but I don't think it was intended as a committee that was going to meet like every month. So it should, stay pretty narrowly focused on the corporate financial picture, in my opinion.
Tina, did you want to address that or not? Sherry?
In discussions with the CFO, I think we determined that it could lead up to approximately 6 meetings per year, depending.
All right, any other questions or comments? All right, so what I have then, if you look at page 108, what I have is committee of the whole. I have co-chairs. Yeah, CAO, did you have your hand up? Okay, sorry. I just saw you pointing, but it looked like you were. Okay. Committee of the whole, co-chairs, Director Ties and Pratt, co-vice chairs, Director Lee and Toth. Members will be all SCRD directors. Electoral Area Services Committee will be, chair will be Director Toth, vice chair Director Hiltz. Members will be all SCRD directors. Budget Committee will be referred back to staff. Chair would be me with Vice Chair Director McMahon. Then the Board Policy Review Committee would be Chair Director McMahon, Vice Chair Director Hiltz, with other members of the committee, Director Toth, Pratt, and Lee. All right. So that's that. And then if we look at terms of reference on page 109 for the committee of the whole, 3.2 would say co-chair and co-vice chair. Terms of reference on page 110 for Electoral Area Services Committee. 3.1 would change to say Electoral Area Services Committee is comprised of all directors of the SCRD board. Board Policy Review Committee, no changes. And the Finance Committee or Budget Committee refer back to staff at this point. Are there any other changes? Yep. Sherry?
Thank you, Chair. I have a question. So when we first started discussing, I noted some comments from directors, concerns about splitting certain services such as fire and Egmont between electoral area services and committee of the whole. So Is the board satisfied with the terms of references for the Electoral Area Services Committee now that the composition of the committee has been amended to all directors? Or should we look to moving those items such as refuse collection, fire, and library into the committee of the whole?
Director McMahon?
I would prefer to move them into the committee of the whole. In agenda review, as we're getting this thing underway, I think that's one of the things that we need to continually look at is this, like most of the wastewater plants are certainly a local discussion appropriate for this committee, but you know, when there are broader implications of a report, that it should be referred to Cal. I don't know if we want to put something like that in the terms of reference, but because it's a consideration.
So on both of them, so Committee of the Whole 109 and 110, it says under duties mandates, it says this list may be amended as the need arises. Matters outside of the mandate of the committee may be considered as necessary to meet operational requirements. Would you like to put something in there, like to reflect that?
From staff's perspective, that sentence gives us authority to move items to whichever committee the board decides they would like to receive those staff reports on. If that's the intention, it's covered.
Okay, my understanding of your conversation with staff was that they're under the belief that if it is a bigger conversation that has implications beyond the electoral areas, that will be moved to Committee of the Whole.
Correct.
Okay.
Operationally, that is our understanding.
Director McMahon?
I just think in the case of libraries, because it is one service, it should be under Committee of the Whole. And also fire protection.
Okay.
The rest of it we can hash out.
So to confirm, Egmont Pender Harbor Library, Roberts Creek Library Service, Half Moon Bay Library Service, Egmont, Half Moon Bay, and Roberts Creek Fire Departments, and refuse collection be moved to Committee of the Whole. It's already on Committee of the Whole.
Okay. I think what you're getting to here is some of these have other financial implications for other areas and have implications for electoral area directors because of other financial matters. Okay. Okay. Anything else? Director Hiltz.
I'd be interested in, the North and South Pender. We're sort of going regrouping kind of, and the intent is to have it more at the regional water service area eventually. So I just, whether that's one that should be more Cal, because it's the water system as a whole, and from the public perspective, having it in one place might be more understandable than having it in two. That was the only one that kind of stood out to me, is because that's the ultimately direction is to include it in the regional water service. So I'm just thinking, so public has to know where to go. So I'm not sure if Director Lee has a thought on that, of how people are going to look for this service. Thanks.
Director Lee?
Two thoughts. Whether North and South Pender goes regional, I don't know. That's something that needs to be discussed further. However, I believe that sharing common practices for billing, water meter, all that thing, kind of makes it that it should be in the Committee of the Whole. Because there's a lot of common things. And I do believe the future direction needs to be planned as with all directors. That's something that we need to consider what we're up to.
Okay, so if I look at the list on page 110, I just want to see if I've got the conversation here. So refuse collection was one of them that was to be moved into committee of the whole. So if we look at, there's nothing on the first column, right? First column was all good, the way it was. The first bullet side. Then the right side, what I've got is refuse collection, North and South Pender Water, Egmont, Half Moon Bay, and Roberts Creek Fire Departments, and then Egmont Pender Harbor Library, Roberts Creek Library Service, and Half Moon Bay Library Services. Is that correct?
Move them over to Cal.
Okay.
Somebody had to.
Director McMahon.
What the heck is heritage conservation?
Thank you for the question. Apparently, it's a fairly inactive function of the planning service.
All right, anything else? So let's look at the recommendations as on page 107. So it would be that that the list of chair appointments and newly established standing committees for committee of the whole, electoral area services, and board policy review as amended be affirmed, and further that the budget committee be referred back to staff, and further that the 2022 board standing committee meeting schedule be updated to reflect appointments to newly established committees effective May 6th, and that these recommendations be forwarded to the board this afternoon. Yes, the terms of reference aren't listed in here as part of this. Yeah, Sherry?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, that was an oversight on my part. I apologize for that. If the board could clarify if we are amending the other three terms of reference, we would also move those forward to board.
Okay, so what you'd like to see is something like, and that the terms of reference as amended be approved, and then they would be part of the, forwarded to the board. All right. Does those recommendations as put forward, does that cover off the conversation? Director Lee.
Just one question before we go forward. Where there's items that there's only 2-3 people voting on them, even if it's committee of the whole or the electoral areas, that process that we've been using will continue? Okay, thank you.
Yes.
I just wanted clarity on that.
Director McMahon?
I just wanted to say that I like the idea of calling the budget committee the finance committee. For one thing, it sounds more important.
Director Hiltz?
Yeah, just had a question on the annual calendar scheduling. The committees that are from time to time, how would those be reflected in the annual schedule, like for the public to know that these things are coming about? Thanks.
Thank you for the question. So I will be consulting with the chair on that. There's 2 ways to do it. And it could be done similarly to how we schedule, say, regional hospital district or other special meetings. So when called upon by the chair or any 2 directors, or if there's some indication of we would definitely be able to schedule the budget committees because those dates are known ahead of time. And perhaps some of the other financial committees, we could schedule those as well because there's statutory requirements and deadlines assigned. I think the policy review committee needs to be a little more fluid depending on what the board's priorities are in terms of policy review. But I would recommend that committee meets at least once per year to keep policies fresh and top of mind.
Director McMahon?
Yes, I would definitely like to have a policy review committee meeting fairly soon to find out what are the policies high on the hit parade of the corporate officer that need review. I have a couple myself, so that we could look at how many of the low-hanging policies we can get to. Thanks.
Director Hiltz?
So as per CO, right now we just have from time to time, so it would be in the terms of reference, you meet at least annually, once annually in the terms of reference. That is that to keep it an active and to have at least one day scheduled out of the annual calendar.
Okay, so that would be under 4.1 under operations.
Yes.
So the Board Policy Review Committee will meet at minimum once per year.
Yes.
Or as required by the SRD
And
board
as
or chair.
required.
Yeah, of the committee, okay. Any other additions, deletions, changes? All right. So would you like me to make the recommendation? I'll make the recommendations. I seconded over there. Any other questions or comments? Director McMahon.
Are we going to review this in, I don't know, September or so and just say, how has this worked?
I think that should be something that should happen, just prior to the election. And we get feedback from staff as well, right? To inform whoever's coming in next election or at the election. Director Lee?
Should we add and that it be referred to board this afternoon?
Yes, yes, that has to go on there.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. All right. Okay, so that recommendation's been made and seconded. All those in favor? Thank you very much. All right, we have a few more reports. Number 5, Annex D, Statement of Reserves and Holding Funds as at March 31st, 2022, pages 113 to 119. Directors, any questions on any of these? Director Hiltz.
Thanks, Chair. It's attachment D. I think this is the first time that this has been presented in one place. So if staff had kind of general comments about, like I'm looking at the Parks Master Plan, where these things come from, and the primary question is how do we release these funds? Is the funds are diminishing in value, like as we keep them. So how do we release these? How do we get them out of here? They seem to be just sitting there in some ways. Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So as part of the last report of this nature, it was requested that staff include things like amenity funds. So we took it a little step further and included all funds that are sitting in accounts or have certain type of arrangements. So I think this is a more inclusive report of all the different sources of funding pots that we have available. So in attachment D, this would be the new information that you have not seen in one centralized location. The change that staff have also done is that some of these funds were placed in investments earning interest and some were not, because there was sort of an unknown use for them. So now we've placed them just in shorter terms, just to allow for that flexibility. And again, we use sort of a pooled fund nature, so it's more from a cash flow perspective. So how do these funds get used? So there's already directives for some of these funds. So for the CARET funds, and that particular program, as the board's aware, is no longer in effect, and it's going to be rebranded and launched through the province. It's more of a green fund through the province. So we have some things where we have a certain type of positions that are funded, and there's a couple of projects that are funded through the financial plan. And so we have our COVID restart funds. Those are fully allocated as per the terms of the provincial. And we also have some things through our amenity funding for Cooper's Green that are also being allocated. However, there are some things here where there isn't a known use for them. So things like, which one was it here? I think supporting agriculture. So that's the one in particular that's very specific, is to support agriculture on the regional district, which was an amenity contribution given to the regional district for a very specific. So some of these are very restricted in nature. However, there's not a plan to expand them. Staff are aware they're sitting there. So I think if there was a known use or a use that arose, this would be one of the funding options that was presented. And this came out of the ag plan several years ago. That was the nature of that one. So the Parks Master Plan is a very historic source of funding. Why I say historic is there was a Parks Master Plan developed, my goodness, over 15 years ago, and over $1.2 million was borrowed to implement the things identified in that particular plan. The majority of those items have been done, and these are the remaining funds. So there's some very unusual past legacy recommendations associated with these. We used to present them as part of budget, and we could most certainly provide some background. So for instance, there's a very small chunk of money to develop trails on the islands, or youth funding type of stuff. So yeah, it's very, these funds, yeah, there's usually some sort of back end as to what they can be used for. The amenities contribution, sometimes there is some mention of what the amenity contributor would like to use them for. Again, these are non-binding contributions. So we do have agreements, so it's in good faith, and every amenity contributor has been fantastic in providing funding as per the outline in the agreement. So if there's anything specific, we can always bring something back.
Thank you. Director McMahon?
So are the CAREP funds, which I don't remember seeing broken out before, is that all committed? And yeah, also a follow-up on the Parks Master Plan, should we, are the requirements of the funding for that flexible? Like, could the board say this no longer makes any sense and could be reassigned, or is it carved in stone?
We'd have to look at the original nature, and we could perhaps bring forward some of the past board direction that reserved those funds. So we would have to change the direction. So I think a subsequent report on each one. As far as the CAREP, they are somewhat specific as to what they should be used for. And as we work through our corporate and community climate work, so the plans that we're working through, it's very much understood that once we have a little more information as far as potential best bangs for buck to reduce our GHGs, that this would be one of the sources of funding to provide for those. But again, we don't know what any additional funding is going to be. In the past, it was somewhere in the neighborhood of $35,000 to $40,000 that we were receiving. A lot of it came through our transit service. So those would be, again, for future budget discussions. I would anticipate likely next year or the year after.
Director McMahon?
Yeah, I was just thinking in terms of the Parks Fund that we've had, unprecedented damage to our parks lately, for which we don't have reserves really to pay for. So just a thought, perhaps we could pass that over to the Parks and Recreation Department, just flag it to their attention that perhaps the 15-year-old fund should be looked at again.
So that would look at what were these funds put there for, and what can they be used for, I think is what the question would be then, right? To see whether or not, potentially right now there's some work around Chester, for example, some studies and things. Does that kind of fit in this, I think is what directors are asking.
So I think if there's a desire to get more information, we'd probably have a motion to that effect, because staff will bring forward a report. What I do know is that the funds are for capital improvements, and so a lot of the things that are happening right now are feasibility studies and are operational, so capital really isn't sitting that mandate quite yet. Doesn't mean it won't in the future, but I think bringing a report back informing you more on the not too far down deep into the history of it, but a little bit of primer on what they can and can't be used for.
Did you want to see that, or do you just want to know that staff have these on their radar, that if they can be used, that they will use them?
I thought I heard a request for a motion to ask for a report, so I'd be happy to make that motion. There will be upcoming capital costs around Chester House for one, but others, I'm sure, as well.
Okay, so you'd like to make a recommendation that staff put a report together on the Parks Master Plan funds and what they can be used for?
Right. As Director Hiltz pointed out, the value of the fund is declining, so we should perhaps take advantage.
Is there a seconder for the recommendation? Seconded. And Director Hiltz?
Yeah, I thought I was hearing from staff it was slightly broader than just the Parks Master. It was some of the other ones as well. I'm not even sure about the hydro amenities, how, what they can be used for. So somehow this stuff needs to get cracked open somehow. So one at a time, or a report that deals with whatever they can, cracking open these things. So a little bit of scope increase, perhaps?
Would you like to make an amendment to the recommendation on the floor?
I'd be interested to hear what staff is capable of doing first and what they had in mind. Thanks.
Tina, so the question is, how much, basically there's concern about staff workload. And if they're asking for, what these dollars can be used for, is that something that could come back? Is that going to be a lot of work for staff, I think is what they're looking at.
Well, there's not a lot here. There's some here that are very specific. For instance, the appropriated surplus for the donation for fire services or feasibility for the establishment. Like that's, there's no other alternative for that unless there's a significant board change. So, I mean, it would potentially just adding historical resolutions to this. What I see is the added value and appreciate the consideration for staff is that it is the first time that you've seen this in one place. And so this particular board may or may not have the context associated with it, and even some of the staff might, because we've had a lot of staff changeover. So I do believe there's value in providing a little context to this particular item. And to your point earlier, if the parks are considering other sources, yes, staff does introduce these types of things, but if there's a desire to change the direction, then that's sort of a different consideration. That's somewhat what I'm hearing, is that maybe it's time for a reconsideration to those historical decisions. So that's the benefit I do see in providing this information.
So what should the recommendation say to give you the direction to provide that information to us?
Well, without having to craft a motion, it would be, and that staff provide a report to a future committee, not naming any, as knowing we have some name changes, related to the investments in community benefit and amenity contributions on contacts as far as what the funds can be used for, and some historical background, and maybe some future options for consideration.
All right, so there's a recommendation on the floor about the Parks Master Plan funds. And now the scope, basically, we're looking at expanding that to potentially the list. What would you like to do with would you like to vote on the motion on the floor? That could be defeated, and then we could make this new motion to basically include all of these. All right? All those in favor of the motion on the floor? All those opposed? Thank you. That's been defeated. All right, so then the recommendation as per our Chief Financial Officer, moved by Director McMahon, seconded by Director Hiltz. Any other comments or questions? All those in favor? Thank you. Anything further on this report? Director Hiltz. Okay. I thought I saw your hand going there to find your mouse again. Any other questions or comments on this report? Seeing none, we'll move on to Annex E. This is Gas Tax Community Works Fund update. Ms. Pearl.
Yes, thank you. So this is just a summary of the reporting. So it's very similar to the prior report, as the purpose of the report is really just to report on the fund. So again, we have a slight amendment from the prior version of this report that you provided, which is on page 121, just underneath the table. I wanted to highlight that upon further review of the past reports, we identified that there is past board motion to reserve up to $300,000 for the Cooper's Green project, but it's not articulated, it's not identified in our financial plan. So what we've done is we've kind of removed it. It is sitting there, so it is something to contemplate. We're going to have some future reports on the Cooper's Green project in entirety in the next month or so, so we can revisit some of that, but I just wanted to bring that to the attention as it is a change from prior reports.
Thank you. So basically, the board made a recommendation, but did not actually make a recommendation to put it into the financial plan.
I think it's been an evolution. So in the past, it was we knew we were going to get contributions, we were making a recommendation, and through the evolution of the project, the sources and uses of funds. So obviously, we got a very large grant, and so that has stacking rule associated with it. So again, can't use gas tax because it's federal funds, which is not able to be used. So it's still available, but there's nothing articulated in the financial plan, which is your other lever. So I think it's disingenuous to say it's reserved because you still have that option, but it's not articulated in your financial plan.
Thank you. Director McMahon.
So Director Ties reminded me that staff have committed to start working on active transportation or ways to spend the gas tax funding this fall, or to get working on it. My question is that I've heard the possibility that some of the work happening on Reed Road, possibly widening the shoulder, might use some of the Area E gas tax money, and I was just wondering what's the procedure for that, and when will decisions be coming our way or not?
I can take a crack at that. The answer is we don't know yet. We are doing some feasibility study work to see what might be possible. We've had some preliminary conversations with staff from the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure on how they might be able to participate with us if we're looking to do some active transportation work as we do the work on Reed Road. We don't know what their potential participation might look like and what the potential for financial support or financial participation might look like. But we're hoping to have some of the feasibility work completed in the near future. And as soon as that's done, and Shelley's not here to give us a progress update on where we're at, we'll be regrouping with both staff from the ministry and from the Active Transportation Grant Program to see if there is a possibility that we could do something with them this year.
So more information forthcoming. Director McMahon?
Yeah, so that would likely involve, say, matching funds, something like that.
Depending on the potential financial participation of Modi, if it can be done, there would be some requirement for a percentage of matching funds. And those matching funds could potentially be gas tax funds.
Thank you. Any other questions on Annex E? Seeing no further questions, we'll move on to Annex F. Any questions on this report? This is contracts between $50,000 and $100,000 from January 1st to March 31st. Director Ties.
Yeah, the one question I have is, I was just looking at the Salish soils contributing to our landfill, which is great, but I was also thinking, hey, we have a huge mine beside us that has a lot of overburden to take care of that could also contribute to the fill, and I'm wondering if Lehigh has ever been talked to regarding that, and whether that's possibly a more competitive way of getting that fill done. Thanks.
Thank you. Does staff want to talk about that?
So, without having the GM of infrastructure here, I would defer that question back to him in particular. I know there have been discussions with Lehigh, and there's lots of back and forth with them, but I will defer that to him.
Thank you. Director McMahon?
I believe we were talking about reviewing our delegation bylaw to change the limits. Where are we with that?
So I think it's a few prongs. It's so this one in particular is associated with your purchasing policy. So that's a recent, this board actually adopted their new purchasing policy. So it's kind of a hierarchy. You got your delegation bylaw, and this is a report out of your purchasing policy where usually actually, so you raise the limit up to the 100,000. So now you only report on things that are under that 100,000 that you might not see. So it's between 50 and 100. You're not going to see those things below. So this is a report. That's why you see this report is out of the purchasing policy.
So that could be on your list to review. Okay. Director McMahon, yeah, the report comes from the policy. Right. Director McMahon, your hand is still up. Did you have something else? All right, any other questions, directors? Nothing on Annex F. Moving over to Annex G. Director, Constituency and Travel Expenses for period ending March 31st, 2022. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, I would look for a motion to adjourn. Moved, seconded, all in favor? Thank you. There's nobody in the gallery. Do we have any questions that came through during the meeting? No questions? All right. Thank you, and we'll see you this afternoon.